I was born in 1917, and I lived in a town out near Pittsburgh called Clairton. I'm very fortunate tonight. There's a friend of mine from Clairton, Lesko. Would you stand up, please? He and I are same age. Thank you. But when I was growing up in Clairton, I played football, and I made all Western Pennsylvania fullback. And I was very fortunate because the mayor of my hometown, Bob Ostermeyer, had graduated with the coach at Penn State, Bob Higgins. So the mayor calls me in and he says, David, I see where you made the honor roll and you played football and made all WPIAL. Said, I'm going to write a letter up to Coach Bob Higgins and you take it up there and show it to him and you can go to Penn State. Well, fortunately for me, I graduated in 1935 and you know, the stock market had crashed in 29, and so all the early years of the 30s was a depression. So nobody had money to go to college, at least in our hometown. So up I go to Penn State, and I go to Higgins, and Higgins says, "Now, David, over on West Beaver Avenue, there's a rooming house, and you'll fire a furnace for your room." "Yes, sir." "And over on Locust Lane, there's a fraternity, the Phi Psi. You're going to wash dishes for your meals, David." "Not only that, how much money you got?" I says, "Well, I worked in the ice plant for Mr. Ostermeyer, and I made 45 bucks. He says, "All right, we're going to let you deliver the college papers. Comes off the press at midnight. And you'll do it out there in West Beaver Avenue where your rooming house is, and you get 50 cents a delivery." He said, "You got to save that money, David, because we're going to let you work in the library in the engineering under NYA, and you get 50 cents an hour. So we're going to defer your fees because you don't have enough money to pay them. At the end of the semester, you got to save that money and pay your fees." Well, folks, I played football, and I was in ROTC, and I was a civil engineer. 5 years later, I graduated from Penn State, and I was a second lieutenant in the Corps of Engineers. And so, Uncle Sam, 5 months later, said, "Go to Fort Belvoir, you have a platoon." Well, at Fort Belvoir, I had this platoon. My job was to teach these guys how to lay mines, pick them up, build bridges under fire, do all those things to help the armor and the infantry move ahead, and to blow bridges in case the Germans were attacking against us. So I had a platoon. Then they made me a company commander, and I had 3 platoons. Now I'm teaching all that stuff to 3 platoons. The next thing that happened, they moved me over into the battalion headquarters as the adjutant. So then, now I'm learning how 3 companies function and how to tell them all this stuff about mines and blowing bridges and stuff. The next thing you know, I'm the battalion executive officer, and they send me out to Camp Swift, Texas as a training officer in a new formed 291st Engineer Combat Battalion at Camp Swift, Texas. Well, boy, I teach all this stuff again. All that stuff I learned back at Penn State. We go on maneuvers, and the battalion commander injures his back, and the 3rd Army engineer calls me in and said, "Now, Major Pergrin, I've now become a major, and it's a couple of years since I was a second lieutenant." He says, "You take this battalion back to Camp Swift and prepare them for overseas movement." Wow. So I'm 26 years of age, and I have 650 kids, average age 18.9. And there were about 15 of them were 16 years of age, and they'd lied about their age, which brought the average age down a little bit. Well, I get we get all shots, we fire all the weapons, bazookas, machine guns, rifles. We get ready get on a ship, a Liberty ship, we start going across the Atlantic, and we're in a convoy. And the convoy is going to be attacked by U-boats, so we have to go up on the full field packs with everybody and prepare for getting out of the ship and getting on boats and so on in case we're fired on. So as the further we go in these 12 days trying to get to Liverpool, the guys become seasick. They throw their full field packs in the ocean, and when we get into Liverpool, we get on a train. We have to walk 2 miles to get on a train. We get on this train, we get down to Devizes, England, where there's a training camp, and there's an old British colonel says to me, "Major Pergrin, you line up your battalion for my inspection." So I said, "Yes, sir." I lined the guys up, and we hid the guys that looked the lousiest, needed a shave, and were seasick in the latrines. And then we stood inspection. This colonel's up and down, he inspects the rifles, he looks at these guys needing shaves. None of them had their full field packs or anything. And he gets me out in front of the battalion, and he says, "Major Pergrin, you have nothing to be proud of here but that American flag." Well, all those 18.9-year-old kids gather around me and say, "We're going to show that son of a bitch something." And they did. They went in on the beaches. They went in the minefields and rescued hundreds of the airborne guys that come down. They found 3,500 bodies in those minefields. It's even much worse than Saving Private Ryan. They then made the attack down to Mortagne. They cleared the mines in front of the infantry. They opened up the road net. They built back bridges, some of them under fire. They then attacked through Bastogne, and they drove right to the Siegfried Line between Belgium and Germany. These kids had built 32 bridges, 7 of them under fire. 18.9-year-old kids. Okay, it's now September, and we're trying to set up a defense all along the Siegfried Line to stop the Germans from attacking. The next thing you know, it gets into November, and the weather gets cold, and it snows, and it's tough. And we're keeping open all those road nets going into Germany through Belgium and Luxembourg. Then, what happens in December 16th, 1944? Hitler invades through the Lochheim Gap into Germany. Now from here on in, I'll show you a videotape that these kids did during the war. Show the tape, please. Show that one there first.
Sorry about that. We're not...
I felt at all times that all American people who haven't experienced war in our land should know how brutal a war is. In December of 1944, Hitler mounted a major attack into the Ardennes area, which was supposed to be a quiet area. During this time, the 291st...
Yeah, we're on. Let's get the lights off.
I felt at all times that all American people who haven't experienced war in our land should know how brutal a war is. In December of 1944, Hitler mounted a major attack into the Ardennes area, which was supposed to be a quiet area. During this time, the 291st Engineer Combat Battalion became alive and active in blowing bridges and stopping the main thrust in the Battle of the Bulge.
Completely by surprise. It was the morning of December 16th, 1944. The German army had launched a counteroffensive unprecedented in the war. 3 German army groups smashed a hole in our line along a 16-mile front. The American units in the area were cut off, bypassed, and otherwise overrun. We were in full retreat. Things looked bad, very bad. The Germans captured large amounts of men and materiel and were driving towards their objective, the port of Antwerp. Their strategy was to advance towards Antwerp and split the Allied army in two. With such an advantage, Germany would be in an enviable position of negotiating for a conditional surrender from the Allies. Well, so much for the big picture. We in the 291st didn't know much about what was going on around us that day. Our colonel, Dave Pergrin, the CO, was the one who kept tabs on everything. He stayed in touch with group headquarters and pretty much knew what was going on at all times. He was an excellent officer, attaining the rank of lieutenant colonel at the ripe old age of 26. And what was important to us was that he had a genuine concern for the men. What we did know was this, that the area in our front was defended by the 106th Division, the 99th Infantry Division, and the 14th Cavalry Group. They were mostly new troops, having just arrived in the Ardennes area from the good old USA. The first we became aware that something was going on that day was when one of our officers, Captain Conlon, reported heavy shells falling in his vicinity at Malmedy, Belgium. These shells were fired by 28-centimeter railway guns with a range of about 15 miles. They were firing at us from about 14 miles distance. Colonel Pergrin picked up his driver, Corporal Ledette, and immediately left for Malmedy to assess the situation. Upon his arrival, he found Captain Conlon repairing damage to the town and learned that several civilians and combat medics were killed in the shelling. From that point on, things really began to happen. On the morning of the 17th, Lieutenant Ray, a platoon commander in Company B, was on a road patrol heading out of Malmedy in the direction of the Siegfried Line. Coming over a hill near Buchenbach, Germany, about a mile and a half from the German border, he sighted American planes dive bombing something on the ground. Began to clear, he saw a tremendous German tank column approaching down Route N32. He reported immediately to his company commander, who in turn reported it to Colonel Pergrin back at his headquarters in Haute-Bordeaux. At once, Colonel Pergrin selected a small staff consisting of an S3, Major Lamp, Lieutenant Stack, the Assistant S3, Lieutenant Jenks, and Assistant S2, Captain Lloyd Sheets, Liaison Officer, and the Assistant Supply Officer, Lieutenant Self. They set out for Malmedy. While heading east en route to Malmedy, they passed an American column of the 7th Armored Division heading west, away from the breakthrough. Colonel Pergrin had decided on a plan to defend Malmedy from the advancing German column. However, upon reaching Malmedy, he found that all the other American units had withdrawn from the area. B Company of the 291st was the only unit left defending the town. Notwithstanding, we immediately set about constructing 15 roadblocks. Time was short, and everyone moved quickly and efficiently. Bridges were prepared for demolition. We worked feverishly to accomplish the task at hand. Every man knew the importance of preventing this overwhelming enemy armored column from breaking through Malmedy and into the vital road net beyond the town. Should the Germans do so, they would quickly overrun other American units in the rear area, cut off the 291st itself, and reach their objective at the Meuse River. If they succeeded, the entire American position on the northern shoulder of the breakthrough would be jeopardized. We were in trouble, big trouble, and some of us thought that maybe we should pull out too. After all, what could our 150 men do to stop an armored column with all its supporting infantry? At that point, the colonel said no. We were going to stay and defend this position at all cost. And so we did. Each roadblock had a 13-man squad to defend it. We were armed with rifles and some machine guns. The heaviest weapon we had to stop a German tank was the 2.37 millimeter bazooka. This was like using spitballs to stop a bull. But if you got lucky, there was a good chance of knocking a track off a tank. And these German Panther tanks were brutes. 45 tons, 5 inches of armor, and mounted with 75 millimeter guns. The German force which broke through into the Ardennes was under the overall command of General Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt. He was a seasoned veteran, having already fought in France, Poland, and Russia. At his command, 3 Panzer armies. The column approaching us was an element of the 6th Panzer Army, commanded by SS General Sepp Dietrich. Under his command, 6 Panzer divisions. Dietrich was one of Hitler's oldest comrades, and his personal bodyguard in the early street brawling days of the Nazi Party. He was a former commander of the 1st SS Panzer Division, Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler, Hitler's bodyguard. Under Dietrich and spearheading the assault in the northern area was the 1st Panzer Division, a Kampfgruppe of which was commanded by Colonel Joachim Peiper. At 32 years old, Peiper was also a veteran of combat in France and Russia. He was an efficient yet ruthless soldier, a classic SS officer. In Russia, he earned the name of Blowtorch Peiper because of his ruthless tactics. He burned villages and homes, killing soldiers and civilians alike. Such was the reputation of the Waffen-SS, and it was well known in the American ranks. Now his Kampfgruppe, or battle group, was heading our way, towards Bonnier, or 5 Points, as it was called. The column was 15 miles long and consisted of Panther tanks, Tiger tanks, half-tracks, mobile guns, 88s, 150 millimeters, and close to 8,000 armored infantry. Despite the overwhelming odds, we were determined to stand and stop him. At about 11:45 on the afternoon of December 17th, a column of Battery B of the 285th Field Observation Battalion came into Malmedy and was personally stopped by Colonel Pergrin outside his command post on the outskirts of the east end of town. At the head of the column was a jeep with a Captain Mills and Lieutenant Virgil Larry. Colonel Pergrin advised them that our patrols had spotted the German column less than 2 miles to our front. But Captain Mills had apparently received orders not to vary from his assigned route. They were anxious to move to the support of the 7th Armored Division at St. Vith. So Captain Mills and Lieutenant Larry made the decision to move ahead to 5 Points and then swing south towards St. Vith. At 12:30 p.m., the column moved out. We set about strengthening our defenses and roadblocks for the expected attack. About an hour and a half later, we heard firing in the vicinity of our roadblock at the east end. We all stopped in our tracks. You could have cut the tension with a knife. In came that old familiar sick feeling in the pit of your stomach. Someone was getting pasted. The roadblock was manned by Lieutenant Colbeck and Sergeant Deshaw of Company B. Deshaw reported by radio that he had heard firing in the vicinity of 5 Points. Colonel Pergrin and the communications sergeant, Bill Quickenberger, grabbed a submachine gun, got in a jeep, and headed out in the direction of the firing. On reaching the roadblock, Sergeant Deshaw reported that the firing had stopped, but he didn't advise going any further. The shooting had sounded like tanks, 88s, and machine pistols. The colonel and Sergeant Quickenberger moved out about 3/4 of a mile from the roadblock, parked the jeep, and proceeded on foot up a rise toward the tree line. As they neared the line of trees, 3 guys came running towards them. They were badly beaten and all appeared wounded. Sergeant Quickenberger raised his machine gun to fire, but was stopped by the colonel. They were able to corral the men, but couldn't make sense out of what they were saying. Back at the command post, Colonel Pergrin got their names. They were Kenny Ahrens, Mike Sharenko, and Albert Valenzi, all members of Company B, 285th Field Observation Battalion. They belonged to the column which passed through Normandy a short time ago. After their wounds had been dressed and they had eaten some hot chow, we were able to get the whole story from Sergeant Ahrens.
I threw my gun on the ground.
And the story was this.
In the air.
As their column approached the 5 Points area, and as they turned south into the road to St. Vith, they received fire from the German tank column approaching from the opposite direction on the road from Germantown. Eventually, they jumped out of their vehicles and hit a ditch which ran along the side of the road. When the firing had ceased, Lieutenant Larry raised his arms and indicated that he was surrendering himself and his command to the Germans. There was nothing else he could do in the face of such opposition. Many of the men were wounded. Colonel Piper approached the scene, gave orders to his officers to hurry the column along and not waste time with prisoners. He then swung south toward Ligneville in order to engage the 14th Cavalry Group. With this accomplished, there would be nothing between him and his objective, the Meuse River. After probing our defenses, Piper had decided to bypass Malmedy, believing that it was too heavily defended. The forward section of the column then moved out, and the next section came up on the prisoners, who had been herded into a field near the road. Of the approximately 150 members of B Company, 285th Field Observation Battalion, who were captured and brought into that field, only 44 men survived. During the next 12 hours, we were able to rescue 26 men, and Colonel Pergrin interviewed 17. At 4:30 p.m. on the afternoon of the 17th, Colonel Pergrin radioed 1st Army and informed them of the German position and the fact that SS troops had gunned down unarmed prisoners of war. This news was reported to General Hodges, commander of 1st U.S. Army. He, in turn, reported it to Eisenhower in Paris.
They drove right into the Siegfried line, where they occupied an area from Montreux all the way down to Edelbruck in Luxembourg. During this time, they went in and rebuilt the bridges in Normandy, Belgium, and prepared to have a defense of that location in case of counterattack. Later on, the battalion holds Malmedy in the face of Hitler's main thrust of the 1st SS Panzer Division in the Battle of the Bulge.
Hodges also reported the fact that we were still hanging on by our fingernails with only 150 men. Eisenhower advised him to take the 30th Infantry Division, commanded by General Leland Hobbs, and move them from the Aachen area down towards Malmedy. As a further precaution, he notified General Gavin of the 82nd Airborne at Reims, France, to move up into the Werbemont area, where it was anticipated that Piper's column might proceed. Colonel Pergrin quickly got into communication with battalion headquarters at Haute-Badeau, requesting them to send Company C from L'Église. They were instructed to leave a squad at Stavelot, en route to Malmedy, in order to prepare a roadblock there, just in case the armored column swung around to the west to attack us from the rear. The battalion was also requested to send us Company A's machine guns and bazookas, and to have A Company act in reserve in the event we were able to stop the armored column at Malmedy and Stavelot. Company A then moved Lieutenant Bucky Walter's platoon into Trois-Ponts. With help from C Company of the 51st Engineers, they prepared the bridges there for demolition. Now, about this time, we started to become keenly aware of another little scheme the Germans were employing to very good use. A select group of English-speaking German commandos dressed in American uniforms were infiltrating our lines and getting into our rear areas. They were all experts in sabotage. They cut phone lines and disrupted communications. Dressed as military police, they misdirected traffic, changed road signs, or otherwise caused a great number of our men to be diverted from areas where they were urgently needed. Mass confusion and mistrust were the order of the day. Many an unsuspecting GI fell victim to their treachery. This special group was under the command of SS Colonel Otto Skorzeny, another Hitler favorite. A daring commando, he was no stranger to calculated risk. At Hitler's personal command, he rescued Mussolini from his mountaintop prison in 1944. Now he headed this special operation, appropriately called Operation Grief. And these guys were damn good, too. You couldn't trust anyone you didn't know. Everyone was checked and double-checked at the roadblocks. How many home runs did Babe Ruth hit in '37? Who was Bud Abbott's partner? What was the capital of Nebraska? If you didn't know, your troubles were only beginning. They even went so far as to paint their tanks with American marking. But we soon wised up. Communications were finally restored. Lost men got back on track, and the enemy tanks discovered and knocked out. But for those grief commandos, unfortunate enough to be captured, justice was dealt swiftly and severely. It was dark and overcast at 5:30 on the evening of the 17th when Captain Moyer, on his way to Malmedy, dropped off Sergeant Hensel with a squad at Stavelo. They moved across the Ambleve River and up the hill where they prepared a roadblock. Private Bernie Goldstein was put out on point. In the meantime, Captain Moyer cautiously moved into Malmedy with 2 platoons and was set up on the defensive line. We now had 180 men in Malmedy, 1 squad in Stavelo, and a platoon in Trois Ponts. After he massacred the soldiers of the 285th FOB at Bonnier, Piper swung his Kampfgruppe south toward Ligneville. At Ligneville, he was attacked by 3 American tanks of the 9th Armored Division, which were easily knocked out. Now Piper and his column ran free and clear on a winding back road. He headed toward Stavelo in order to get back on the route heading west. This would enable him to break out on the Meuse River and capture the bridges there. It would also enable the 6th Panzer Army to break through our own 1st Army.
On the evening of December 17th, shortly before dusk, Sergeant Hensel and his 13 men set up a hasty roadblock south of the railroad bridge at Stavelo, Belgium. Hensel set up a machine gun, a bazooka, and a set of daisy chain mines. The men were all equipped with rifles. Shortly thereafter, at 6:30 p.m., the men in Hensel's squad heard the approach of Colonel Joachim Piper's armored column.
The time was around 6:30 at night. In the darkness, the lead tanks of Piper's column approached Stavelo very cautiously, as they didn't know what to expect from the defenses there. The tanks crawled forward at a snail's pace. Out in that darkness, on the point, was Private Bernie Goldstein, native of Brooklyn, New York. He heard the armored infantry riding on the lead tank speaking German. In his nervousness and excitement, Private Bernie Goldstein, armed only with a .30 caliber M1 rifle, yelled out his challenge. Halt! The tank stopped. There was silence for a second, and then all hell broke loose. At the same time Goldstein yelled halt, Sergeant Hensel moved up the bazooka. Even though they couldn't see anything, they fired at the sound. With luck on their side, they knocked one of the tracks off the lead tank, causing it to pivot and block the road. This gave Goldstein a chance to make his way back to the squad. The rest of the German column then backed up the hill, not wanting a chance of blind attack on what they now believed to be a heavily fortified town. Now, at that moment, there was nothing between Piper and his objective 25 miles away, but one roadblock defended by 14 men. Unaware of this fact, Piper delayed his attack for 12 hours. This allowed for two very significant things to happen in the meantime. First, General Hodges was able to dig up some help for the 291st at Malmedy. At 11 p.m. on the 17th, the 99th Norwegian Battalion came into Malmedy with 900 infantry. And let me tell you, we were never so glad to see anyone in our lives. In with these guys came some anti-tank guns and armored infantry. Things became a little snafu in the beginning, though. It seemed that none of the Norwegians spoke English. So when they came up on the roadblock, we naturally assumed that they were some of Skorzini's men dressed in American uniforms. You know, the grief guys again. But their CEO, Colonel Henson, convinced our men on the outpost that they were okay. And in they came. Secondly, Colonel Bill Carter, the 1st Army engineer, had done some digging of his own and had sent one armored infantry company and a company of anti-tank guns to Stavelot to help Sergeant Hensel and his men. In addition to that, Colonel Anderson had sent one company of the 202nd Engineers into Stavelot as well, with orders to prepare the bridge for demolition. If we couldn't beat these guys now, at least we could slow them up until we could beat them. At about 8:30 in the morning, Piper made his attack on the defenses of Stavelot. The fighting was furious. Lasted for 2 hours. The attack was so sudden that the men of the 202nd Engineers didn't get a chance to blow the bridge before they were forced out of there. Piper crossed the bridge, then headed west towards Trois Ponts. As he reached the outskirts of the town at 11:30 a.m., on the morning of December 18th, the 51st Engineers blew the two bridges over the Somme and Amblève rivers to the north right in his face. With some of Piper's men already on the bridge, Lieutenant Wallers of A Company 291st, with Sergeant Miller on the detonator, blew the bridge to the south over the Somme River. Piper was then in serious trouble. With the blowing of the bridges at Trois Ponts, his column was forced north in the direction of the Amblève River Valley. All the delays we had caused him up to this point were beginning to take their toll. He was well behind his timetable in the assault. Not only was Piper in trouble, but he was becoming desperate as well. As he entered the village of L'Église, he added more brutality to his reputation and invoked his blowtorch tactics used so mercilessly in Russia. He massacred innocent civilians and blasted their houses and surrounding buildings. It was a horror beyond description. Piper continued into Chenot and crossed the bridge there. Directly along the route to the Meuse River, Piper had to cross the bridge at Liane Creek. In anticipation of this, Colonel Pergrin's S3, Major Lamp, ordered Lieutenant Edelstein and his platoon of Company A to prepare the bridge for demolition. The bridge was 180 feet long. It had been blown by the Germans once before, during their retreat into the Siegfried Line. The 291st had rebuilt it as a timber trestle bridge, and now we prepared to destroy it again. It was 3:30 in the afternoon of the 18th. The bridge was prepared with 2,500 pounds of explosive and defended by Lieutenant Edelstein and 22 men. At 4:15, a group of civilians on bicycles approached the bridge and warned Edelstein's men that the Germans were approaching. The men were instructed not to blow the bridge until the lead tank was on. An emergency charge was prepared in case the first one didn't go off. So Sergeant Chapin, on the explosive device in the guard shelter for the bridge, held off the explosion. He didn't have long to wait. Within minutes, Piper's tanks approached the position. As the lead tank moved onto the bridge, Chapin let it go. The bridge disappeared in a geyser of timber, dirt, and rocks. The second charge wasn't necessary. Since the surrounding area was very swampy, there was no opportunity for heavy armor to cross or ford the creek. He then tried to get a couple of small half-tracks across the bridge at Forge, and we were ready for that move, too. Sergeant Billington and Johnny Rondinell of Lieutenant Edelstein's platoon pulled daisy-chain mines across the roads as the half-tracks approached. And up they went. Piper was stock cold. The end creek marked the furthest penetration of his armored column during the Battle of the Bulge. After the war, when Piper was asked what he thought when we stopped him at Leanne Creek, he said, "All I could do was pound my knee and scream, 'The damned engineers, the damned engineers.' And so was born the name of which we will forever be proud, the damned engineers." Back in Normandy, we awaited the attack that everyone knew was coming. We had been further reinforced by another battalion of infantry. This was the 2nd Battalion of the 120th Regiment of the 30th Infantry Division. At this time, we had one full company in line as infantry. On our left flank was the 99th Norwegian Battalion, and on our right was the 120th Infantry Regiment. Early in the morning of the 21st of December, it began to snow. Colonel Otto Skorzeny and the 2nd Prong of the 6th Panzer Army moved into position to attack Malmedy. His force consisted of 5,000 men and about 120 armored vehicles. Mixed in with his command were units of the Waffen SS, and it had been SS units which were involved at 5 points. With the memory of Bonnier and the massacre still very fresh in our minds, we knew that any attack would be all out. We waited. And then about 5:30 a.m., they hit the tripwires and the mines out in front of our position. As they attacked, they yelled, "You Yanks can go home now. Here we come." Well, we gave them our answer to that. The infantry piled up out of the fields in front of our defense on the railroad embankment. They were persistent in their attack. At the western end of Normandy, we had to blow the railroad bridge, which spanned the highway. We used daisy-chain mines and bazookas against tanks. We knocked out 5 of them. And things were getting very hot. The outcome hung in the balance.
So now we knew, as we had these great defenses set up with the regiment of the 30th Division and the 526th Armored Infantry and the 825th Anti-Tank Guns and the Norwegians, on the morning of the 21st of December, when it started to snow, Skorzeny made an all-out attack to the west end of Malmedy and a drive from Bonnier towards the east end of Malmedy. And during that attack, he went into our minefields, and we didn't blow any bridges, but at the west end, protecting the Wash River Bridge and the railroad viaduct on the main road leading west out of Malmedy, there was a big fight went on between some of Skorzeny's tanks and infantry against the men of K Company of the 120th Regiment of the 30th Division and the men of the 291st. So at the Wash River Bridge, where the battle really ensued and went in depth, the Germans kept attacking with their infantry, the ones that could get through the minefields, and they got 3 tanks to move up towards the Wash River Bridge. There was a corporal in the 30th Division by the name of Corporal Fran Curry. And Fran Curry grabbed a machine gun and attacked with a machine gun. He ran back into it and jumped in a armored vehicle and fired from that. He fired rifles and machine guns, and he engaged in a heavy battle there with Scorzini's men. Naturally, the men of the 291st, Consiglio, and many of the people in A Company of the 291st battled with Fran Curry and the men of K Company of the 120th Regiment. The battle lasted for about 3 hours, and during this battle, no German tank was able to penetrate because our men pulled daisy chain mines in front of tanks that knocked the tanks out, and many of the men in the other tanks were knocked out by bazookas fired by people like Fran Curry. This was a tremendous battle, but in the end, the Germans were never able to penetrate at that site, and Scorzini had lost many men to artillery fire as well as into the minefields laid by the 291st. And when they retreated out of there, they only had about 1/3 of the number of Germans that made the attack.
In the western end of Normandy was a paper mill, and around this mill the battle raged for 5 hours. Events seesawed back and forth. It was wholesale destruction on a grand scale. By 11:30 a.m., the Germans withdrew, leaving the field littered with equipment and dead. The following day, we had to blow the railroad viaduct and the Wash River Bridge. Scorzini's tanks were beginning to penetrate there. Of the 5,000 Germans that went into the attack, less than 2,000 came out. We had held. The men of the 291st, the 30th Division, and the 99th Norwegians had all done their jobs. Normandy was still in Allied hands.
When the 291st Engineer Combat Battalion had successfully stopped the main thrust in the Battle of Bulge by blowing the bridge at the Leon River, we moved on with the 82nd Airborne Division in the attack to drive the Germans back into the Lochheim Gap, where Piper had broke through. As we neared the Lochheim Gap, we had to build a bridge under fire at Lanzerat. On the completion of this mission, when the 82nd Airborne finally broke into the Siegfried Line, the 291st was then assigned the mission of moving north to go in the attack with the 78th Division to build the bridges across the Royal River, which were expected to be blown by the Germans as we attacked into the Royal River Valley. We built the 3 bridges, one at the Schwammenil Dam, which had been blown by the Germans, one at Blens, and one at Heinhelm. These 3 bridges were all under fire as we built them, and we had casualties there. We then attacked across the Cologne Plain with the 9th Armored Division and the 78th Infantry Division. The attack was made by 2 combat regiments up front and 1 in reserve. Our mission was to clear mines and build back the bridges blown by the retreating Germans. As we neared the Rhine River, we learned that there was a bridge across the Rhine still intact. We heard that it had been damaged by the Germans making an attempt to blow it. So we received then the assignment of building a bridge across the Rhine at Remagen, Germany, due to the point that the Ludendorff Bridge was expected to collapse. We built a bridge across the Rhine at Remagen, Germany under fire. We had 42 casualties. We were fired on by mortars and at first machine guns. 88 fire. We were strafed and bombed by the German Air Force, and they threw 11 V-2 rockets at us. So we built this 1,080-foot bridge under fire in 30 and a half hours. We got the 99th Division across it in the attack. The Ludendorff Bridge collapsed, and we went on from there and drove the Germans back into Austria. Our final job was to build a bridge across the Danube River near Regensburg, where we had our last men killed or wounded. We had 97 Purple Hearts, the Presidential Citation signed by Roosevelt, the French Croix de Guerre signed by the President of France, the Belgian Fourragère signed by the King of Belgium, the Magnum Mackay, 97 Purple Hearts, 82 Bronze Stars, 8 Silver Stars. I have the Congressional Medal of Honor. I have the George Washington Medal of Honor, which is the highest medal that an American can get. Any questions? Yes.
Two quick ones. I went to Cheltenham High School right after World War II, and our history teacher thought Otto Skazerny was a great hero, and I disagreed. One of the few times I spoke out in high school, I stood up and challenged him on that because of his politics, because of what he fought for, not the things he did. How do you feel about that? And then I have a second question.
Skorzeny being a hero?
Yes. He went on it, the teacher went on at length of what an accomplishment.
We badly defeated him there at Malmedy when he made the attack. And from there on in the war, he was able to do nothing. So, from our side, we never considered him a German hero. Piper was much more of a hero than he was.
And the second question, Bucky Walters, that's a familiar name to anybody that knows Cincinnati baseball. Yeah. Is it possible this is the same Bucky Walters from Philadelphia?
This is not the same Bucky Walters.
Okay.
This Bucky was from Washington State, and he handled a platoon, and he was very much involved in blowing a lot of the bridges we had to blow. We built 77 bridges during the war, 19 of them under fire. Any other questions?
Thank you. Thank you for being who you are.
Would you take a moment and describe daisy chain mines? Was this like a wire with a mine and another wire?
Yeah.
And why didn't when the mine go off, why didn't it blow up the wire?
Well, mines were about this round, see, and then you had a chain that went about 3 feet to the next mine. So you would drag a chain full of mines across the road in front of the tank. Johnny Rondinell was the one that through the mines, daisy chain mines in front of Piper's half tracks that got across the Fordsmouth Bridge, and he knocked them out, and that's as far as Piper ever got during the war. I'd like to say a few, yes.
Your bridge across the Rhine, Colonel. Was it a platoon bridge?
It was called, yes.
No, the one he rebuilt.
Was it a pontoon bridge?
The bridge.
It was called a treadway bridge. It had rubber floats, and there was a steel tread between the floats, and each float was 22 feet long, and it required to cross the Rhine River 84 floats. But during the building of the bridge, we had 42 floats knocked out either in the construction sites or on the bridge itself.
How did you work? How did you control the current? Did you have problems with setting the?
We controlled the current by each float that we took out in the water. We dropped a 100-pound kedge anchor down in the Rhine. It was on a rope to each float. This sort of anchored the floats, and then when we got the bridge across, we made it sort of against the current in a curve, and then we put a 1.5-inch iron cable across from each side and ropes out to that to hold the bridge in place. The current was 8 feet per second.
My compliments, Colonel. You did it quicker than Caesar.
Yeah, now
He's a lot younger.
the interesting thing about the battalion, we have become quite famous, and I have been a lecturer at West Point, the War College at Carlisle. I've been with the NATO forces in Europe, and I've been the colonel of the regiment of Penn State's ROTC units for a number of years, and I've trained these ROTC units and the engineers to lay mines, pick up mines, and blow bridges. So I've done that also with the 28th Division's combat engineers. I've taught them the same thing. And there's many books written about our battalion. The first book that we in the battalion wrote was the GI Journal of Sergeant Giles, and Sergeant Giles was a weapons sergeant in the battalion. He'd married Janice Holt, who was a famous historian about the Southwest, so we all got together in 1959 and put this GI Journal together. It was a story of those 18.9-year-old kids. Henry Giles was 21, so he was older. But on Publisher's Day for this one, we got together and we wrote The Damned Engineers. It's a full story of the battalion in the Battle of Bulge, and as you all remember in the video, Piper shouted when we blew the bridge at Leanne River that he shouted The Damned Engineers, so we entitled this book that. This book has been quite famous. It's a relic, and there's somebody here has a copy of it, and he had to pay $85 for this book, and if you go in one of these special bookstores, they charge about $150 for it. Then I was asked by the chief engineer to write the full story of the battalion, so I wrote this book, First Across the Rhine, which is the full story of the battalion from the very beginning at Camp Swift to the very end. This book has been used throughout the military in the Marines and the Army as training manual. And if my English comp teacher knew I wrote a book, she'd turn over in her grave. But then the new chief engineer, after that one, asked me to write another book. So I wrote a book entitled Engineering the Victory, and this is a full story of the Battle of the Bulge. the armor, the infantry, the engineers, the anti-tank guys, and everybody else. So it's a full story of the Battle of the Bulge, and this has been published by Schiffer Publishing and also being used in the military as a training manual. And then I have a great friend over in Europe. Major General Mike Reynolds was the British commander of the NATO Mobile Ground Forces, and Mike got all excited about what my battalion did, and he wrote the book The Devil's Adjutant, which is a full story of Piper. So that's about as much as I have to say, and I've enjoyed being here, and I particularly enjoyed being here with you. Yes?
Tell the story again of what happened to Colonel Piper.
Yeah, Colonel Piper, when the war was over, he tried to disappear, but he was captured, and they put him in a prison down near Dachau, where they massacred a bunch of Jewish people. And then when the war was over, he was tried for his war crimes, and particularly for what he did at Gognier near Malmedy, massacring the men of the 285th. During a trial, he was sentenced to hang, but that was overruled. And then he was imprisoned, and he was imprisoned in Dachau with a lot of other criminals, and the trials had those who were supposed to be hanged, and none of them ever hung. But after 15 years as a prisoner, our Senator McCarthy, who was an anti-communist, and he knew that these Nazis were anti-communists, so he maneuvered and got them freed. So Piper, when he was freed, he went to in a Porsche plant in Stuttgart. Well, unfortunately, while he was there, we come out with a video on the Battle of the Bulge with Henry Fonda, which doesn't tell the true story of the Battle of the Bulge, but this caused the people in Stuttgart to accuse him of being a war criminal. So he escaped out of there, and he went into Chèvres, France, in the mountains, and he built a chalet, and he started writing. He was a very literate man. He started writing stuff in English and German and French about various other things than wars. And in 1976, in front of his chalet, they painted in red paint war criminal. So he sent his wife and 2 children back into Germany, and the night of July 10th in 1976, his chalet was burnt down and his body was found in it, and there was a machine gun beside him and a pistol, but that was identified as his remains. Nobody was ever accused of doing this, but everybody thought it was the French underground. That's the story of Piper.
Skorzeny.
Skorzeny was one of those fortunate people. Hitler trusted him greatly. So there was a big bank in Berlin that Hitler wanted to save the money, so he gives Skorzeny the job of saving the money. So Skorzeny, with this money, he sends some of it down into South America with some other people that were part of the Nazi army. And he went down into Italy, and finally he went into South America. And then he came back, and he was never tried or anything, and he died a natural death, and he was from Austria, and his grave is now in Austria. But when he attacked us in Normandy, he got badly defeated, and I was fortunate that the 30th Division and those Norwegians came in on my defenses. And I think he would have beat me if I was there all by myself. It was my battalion. Any other questions?
Colonel, I might mention that you have some of the books here. What are the titles of the books that you have available if anyone would like to have some?
Yeah, I have a box First Across the Rhine. This book is $20, so if anybody would like a copy, I'd be glad to let you have it for $20.
Okay.
The other book that I wrote, Engineering the Victory, this was published by Schiffer Publishing, and you can get this book by looking up Schiffer Publishing's phone number. They're in Glen, Pennsylvania, and you can order it over the phone. This is a great book, and it's got over 200 pictures of what my battalion did at war. Now, all these photographs that I've shown you around here were photographs taken by my battalion photographer. His name was Calvin Chapman, and he was always up front. Fortunately, he was never wounded. He took over 3,000 photographs. So that's the reason we have been able to tell our story picture-wise and use pictures in the books. When he came back with the negatives at our first reunion way back in 1975, he brought the negatives to the reunion, and then we put together books using those pictures. And about these videos, those videos were developed when I went to the chief engineer's lecture at the engineer school at Fort Belvoir. There was a Marine there by the name of Maniscalco, and Maniscalco had come out of the Marines and got a degree in communications, and then he was hired by the chief engineer to work up the story of speakers of the engineers from World War II. Unfortunately, when I made a talk on the Battle of Bulge, he videotaped my story for the chief engineer. And later on, he called me up on the phone. He said, if I'll come down to the archives in Washington, D.C., he'll show me my guys building a bridge across the Rhine under fire. So I went to the archives, and I was amazed. He had a 90-minute can of film taken by the Signal Corps of my guys building this bridge across the Rhine at Remagen. And he also had captured German film of the same thing. So we put together the full story of building the bridge across the Rhine, and it was entered in the international competition and won the award for excellence. That video is on the History Channel, but over the years I've gone back to the archives and I found enough material to do 16 videos about our battalion in action. And 4 of those programs are on the History Channel, and most of them are being used throughout the Marine engineers and the Army engineers as training material. Any other questions?
You know, there was a report or a book about One Bridge Too Far. Do you recall that?
Yeah, that one bridge too far was at Nijmegen. That's where the airborne and the British tried to get across that island-like structure and get ahead of the Rhine River to drive down the Rhine River. But when they got to that bridge there, the Germans got it blown, and that was the bridge too far. It wasn't our bridge called the bridge too far. Yes.
Dave, one of the dubious honors that combat engineers have is picking up mines that their opposite number has placed in front of them. What were some of the more difficult obstacles that you had to clear during your time as a combat engineer?
The worst we had to clear was the minefields on Normandy Beach, is the Omaha Beach, and the second worst was the mines that the Germans put out between Malmedy and the Lawshine Gap when we attacked with the 82nd Airborne, and it had snowed about 2 feet, so the road net was full of snow, and the Germans had laid mines throughout this area, so we had to go out in front of the infantry and clear those mines and then bring a bulldozer up and open up the road net. So mine clearing is tough. Fortunately for us, of all the mines, thousands and thousands of mines we cleared during the war, we only had one of our men wounded, and he had his leg knocked off. And his name was Buffon, and he was from Buffalo, New York. Any other questions? Well, I certainly appreciate being here with you, and good luck down the road.